So, I mean, for any of the audience who haven't heard it, essentially they were studying addiction and, they found out that rats would get highly addicted to this morphine water. You put a rat in a cage, give it some water laced with morphine. The rat sits there and drinks the morphine until it dies. It's just so addicted to it. But then they realize, hey, these rats are living in these miserable conditions. They're not happy. It's not a natural environment. Let's give them a rat park, rats to play with and exercise wheels and greenery and shrubbery. They did that and gave them the morphine water, and the rats barely touched the water. And it really showed us that addiction is less about this particular substance or behavior. That's important, but it's not kind of a final note. It's not like, okay, if you have that substance, you're 100% going to get addicted. It really depends on how you're living your life and what factors are present or not present. But being present, having that present moment awareness, it gives you access to that space where you get to choose how to live.
Mhm.
And that's where, there's that famous quote that's attributed to Viktor Frankl. It's actually Stephen Covey summarizing the work of Viktor Frankl, but it's this quote that says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. So it's between stimulus and response, between something happening and your response, there's actually space there. And in that space is where you get to choose how to respond. And that's where all of your growth and all of your freedom lie, is just in that space. Welcome back to Unhooked. Today, I'm sharing a conversation I recently had with Darren McGee on his YouTube channel, Darren F. McGee. In this conversation, we get into my own journey with porn addiction, what actually makes porn so addictive, the difference between compulsion and full-blown addiction, and why recovery is about a lot more than just stopping a behavior. We also talk about AI and where this whole space might be headed. I'll drop a link to Darren's podcast in the show notes, so go check out his channel and give him a follow. Before we dive in, just another reminder that if you're looking for support, please go check out unhookedacademy.com. I have a free 14-day reset that you can download, and you can also learn more about my group coaching program, Unhooked Academy. All right, without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Lipkowitz. He's a former genetics researcher and ordained Buddhist monk. He's also a mindfulness teacher, an executive coach, and he is the host of the Unhooked podcast. He's also the founder of the Unhooked Academy, which is a recovery program focused primarily helping men with pornography addiction. Thanks for joining us today, Jeremy.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
My first question would be, I guess, what's been your journey? What's led you into this line of work?
My journey is with my own experience with porn addiction. It's something that I got exposed to when I was a young boy. It didn't start with porn. It started in a much more innocent way, looking at Victoria's Secret catalog that would come in the mail, the lingerie catalogs. But it slowly grew when I got access to the internet, got access to porn. And it got to the point where when I was in college, I was watching it on a daily basis for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a night. And so just going through my own experience of realizing it was an addiction, realizing it was having consequences on my personal life, on my relationships, and then finding my way out of that mess, finding my way through recovery, primarily through the lens of Buddhism and mindfulness practices, just realized how much better my life was when I was on the other side of that addiction. And so I started helping other guys do the same.
I think it's interesting when people talk about addiction and people talk about the triggers to certain things. It's, I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling whatever. And what I've come to learn, maybe you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I think a lot of the time, the biggest trigger is not actually your mood or your mindset. It's availability and opportunity. Would that be fair to say?
There would be a lot of truth to that statement. I mean, just how easily accessible it is, how affordable it is, how anonymous it is. We call those the 3 A's of porn addiction: the affordability, the accessibility, and the anonymity. So those factors, when you combine them, make substance or behavior much more addictive. That being said, there is usually some internal kind of motivation
Mm.
behind the acting out. Some of it is just the autopilot, the routine. You're in the same place that you've always done it. So there's some momentum to the behavior. Maybe it's always done at night at a certain time, always done in a hotel. But usually there is some underlying emotional component to it. And it might just be boredom. It might be a sense of a lack of purpose in your life, just a feeling of uneasiness. There are a lot of subtle, unpleasant emotions that people experience throughout the day. And porn is a way that people cope with it, a way that they numb out or escape that very subtle, a lot of people aren't even aware of the subtle, unpleasant emotions
Yeah.
that they're experiencing.
Yeah. It's one way of looking at it is I don't want to feel that. I want to feel this. I don't want to feel bored. I want to feel excited. I don't want to feel weak. I want to feel powerful. It's like an escape. Sometimes maybe even an anesthetic to some degree.
Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
kind of thing. You mentioned from a young age, from the age of 12, starting to look at pictures, images, and things like that. The accessibility, of course, makes it more easily available. At what point did you realize this was becoming a problem?
I was in my late teens and early 20s when I started to notice some of the signs that
Mhm.
my lust, my objectification, my engagement with porn was impacting my life and my relationships. So it was really towards the end of my undergraduate career when I was at the University of California, Davis, when I started to notice some of the signs of this addiction, the ways that I felt enslaved by lust
Mhm.
and how it was starting to leak into my relationships, changing my expectations of intimacy, my
Mhm.
satisfaction with my partners, and then also the feelings of shame that I was experiencing around it, and the feelings of dissatisfaction in life. So that was when I started to notice some of these impacts and started to actually be able to recognize that it was coming from my use of porn, because that's another step. A lot of people will notice something's wrong.
Mm.
My relationship isn't where I want it. My life isn't right. My motivation doesn't feel like it used to, but they aren't able to make that connection and realize how porn is impacting them.
Mm. I think it would be fair to say that whenever, well, human beings in general, whenever we're feeling something that we don't particularly want to feel, that could be anything. That could be boredom. That could be anxiety. That could be stress. That could be some kind of dissatisfaction. I think maybe not necessarily our default, but certainly one of the things that we go to is what takes this away? What's the best way to avoid this? And depending on what it is, there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that. Let's be honest, there are some things that are in our best interest to avoid. It's just that sometimes the very things we do to avoid the discomfort are the very things that are either making it worse or at the very least, they keep it going. And this is the thing about an addiction as well, regardless of the addiction, doesn't matter what it is, could be gambling, could be alcohol, could be anything. I believe an addiction is going to cost you more than you ever thought you'd have to pay. And it ain't going to give you a fraction back of what you thought it would. But there's like a compulsion to keep on doing it, hoping that you're going to get, I wouldn't even say the dopamine, you're going to get some kind of ease. Would that be fair enough?
Yeah, I was just talking with one of my guys about this recently. That one of the things that addiction does to us is it makes us just say, screw the consequences. I don't even want to think about how this is going to impact me down the road, an hour from now, a day from now, a month from now, 5 years from now. I just want this immediate satisfaction. I want this immediate pleasure, this immediate escape. And we forget all the ways that it's going to harm us down the line.
Mhm.
And it's very sad. I mean, people will have these experiences, these deep rock bottom experiences where they wake up to the reality of the situation and realize how much harm they're causing themselves and their loved ones. And then if they don't actually do the inner work of learning how to uproot these behaviors and really practice recovery, they'll just dive right back in, knowing how much harm it's going to cause, but unable to say no to it.
Yeah. I think just to add to that as well, sometimes what you might find is if you're not working on the underlying problem, sometimes it's going to move to something else. So it's the same kind of thing, but it might move to maybe gambling or drinking or something. So it's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
cross
cross
addiction.
addictions. Yeah, and it's totally true. I mean, this is why in the work that I do, we don't focus on just stopping the behavior. You
Mhm.
know, we say often sobriety is not the same as recovery. You can stop a particular behavior, but if you don't address what's going on beneath the surface, if you don't look at the underlying roots of the behavior or the roots of the addiction, you might stop watching porn, but it'll inevitably pop up somewhere else if you don't look at why you got addicted to porn in the first place. And for many guys, it will be junk food or video games, or it can escalate to all kinds of other things, infidelity. So we really do have to look at addiction on the whole and look at, okay, what is the tendency that I have to want to escape my emotions? And how am I using substances or behaviors as a coping mechanism to escape and to numb out?
There's two questions I'd like to ask on that. The first one would be, how would you unpack the difference between maybe compulsive use and an addiction? Where would they even cross over? Because there can be a compulsion to things and there is full blown addiction.
Yeah, I would say they both overlap and they're on the same spectrum. And I don't particularly even spend too much time distinguishing between the two, except for understanding, um, that the compulsive aspect is part of what makes it an addiction. Is that feeling of being compelled, that feeling of feeling you need to do something, even if it's not in your best interest. And so there's definitely that compulsive component to any addictive behaviors. So in that sense, they overlap some.
Okay. I would wonder sometimes, is one looking at like a reward system, the other is maybe escapism, but there is
You
the
might you
cross.
might classify those as kind of two sides of the same coin. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
that
I think
that's
you're.
what much of the escapism is
Mhm.
I'm gonna get some temporary feeling of a pleasant experience. I'm gonna get some reward, some
Mhm.
dopamine hit, some pleasure, some sense pleasure, bodily sensation of pleasure, mental stimulation of pleasure.
Yeah.
And that's the reward. And it's a form of escape because we want to escape the unpleasant experience, the unpleasant emotion, whether it's boredom or insecurity, loneliness or fear. And so they're very much tied together. They're quite inextricably linked.
Mm, that's a fair point. The other question I was going to ask is pornography in particular. It's very addictive. It's more addictive than people would think. And I've heard you speak previously about again that spectrum. It's like doom scrolling, constantly going through social media, and what you see is the same thing with pornography. Continually scrolling through, trying to find the right movie, the right image, the right whatever it happens to be. Um, what is it in particular that makes that very addictive? That has someone hooked? They're maybe looking for a 10-minute video or something like that, but they could spend 3 hours trying to find the right one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question of what makes it so addictive. And there's a lot of different components that add in. One is just understanding how powerful of an energy our sexuality is in a very beautiful way. I mean, we are sexual beings. It's a beautiful and wonderful part of being human. And it's very primal to us. It's a very primal energy that's deeply ingrained. And so understanding that you're tapping into that component, which feels just so raw and primal and human. Um, when you add on top of that, that there is a multi-billion-dollar porn industry
Mhm.
that is engineering its product to be as addictive as possible. That's where you get this situation that we find ourselves in of this substance, this behavior that you ingest, that you eat, through your eyeballs. A lot of people don't think it's a substance, but it works on the same neural pathways, the same
Yeah.
dopamine systems as any kind of substance.
The brain
And
becomes dependent on the very thing that's given it a hit.
exactly, yeah. And not just dependent on the thing, you get addicted to novelty. And this is why people
Mm.
can end up scrolling for hours and hours and hours with that search for finding something just slightly better. Because what you're hardwiring into your brain is not just, I like watching porn, but I like watching something new, something different, something slightly better. because every time you scroll on one of these tube sites and you're seeing hundreds of thumbnails, hundreds of videos, hundreds of faces, every new video gives you that little spike of dopamine. And you're training your brain. This is where we get into the habit loops and reward pathways, training your brain that what actually gives you the stimulation is seeing something new, seeing something fresh and novel. And so it engineers, it kind of it ingrains this subtle dissatisfaction with what you have
Mhm.
and this feeling of if I just had something slightly better,
Mm.
then I would be happy. And so you become like a superhighway in your brain. These neural pathways of dissatisfaction are the things that are being strengthened. Of I don't have what I want yet, and it's just around the corner is the promise of something slightly better. Even if you then find a video that feels like, wow, this is the perfect video and this person is perfect and this sex scene is perfect, there's this little voice in your head that says, what if there's something better just around the corner? Just one more click.
Yeah.
And that's the addictive tendency. Just one more drink, then you'll be happy. And you never end up reaching that state of satisfaction.
Trying to get that hit that you got first time around is not achievable, but we keep on seeking for the thing that gave us the hit first place, which keeps us looking. Be interesting to ask from your perspective, what kind of factors do lead to something like pornography addiction? Again, we could be talking about, it becomes habitual, starts out as entertainment or whatever. Again, these things progress. There's it being freely available, as you say, and there's an industry which knows that it's addictive and is pushing it. But on an individual level, what sort of factors would contribute to? Surely we're talking much more than loneliness and disconnection. I'm sure they're a big part of it, but what sort of factors would fuel the addiction?
I wouldn't underestimate how profound loneliness and disconnection are.
Mm.
I would say they are maybe two examples of a broader underlying spectrum of
Mhm.
emotional, just being out of alignment emotionally, not having a sense of deep inner fulfillment or inner peace, not having our needs met. And there's a lot of scientific studies that support what we now understand as kind of this model of addiction coming from not being fulfilled, not getting your needs met, not living in alignment with how you should be living. There's the famous rat park experiment. Are you familiar with the rat park experiment?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for any of the audience who haven't heard it, essentially they were studying addiction and, they found out that rats would get highly addicted to this morphine water. You put a rat in a cage, give it some water laced with morphine. The rat sits there and drinks the morphine until it dies. It's just so addicted to it. But then they realize, hey, these rats are living in these miserable conditions. They're not happy. It's not a natural environment. Let's give them a rat park, rats to play with and exercise wheels and greenery and shrubbery. They did that and gave them the morphine water, and the rats barely touched the water. And it really showed us that addiction is less about this particular substance or behavior. That's important, but it's not kind of a final note. It's not like, okay, if you have that substance, you're 100% going to get addicted. It really depends on how you're living your life and what factors are present or not present. And so what this shows us is that, what leads to addiction is a bunch of things. One is if we don't know how to cope with difficult emotions, if we don't know how to deal with sadness or grief or insecurity in a healthy way, then at a very young age, we learn these unhealthy coping mechanisms to escape those feelings. And they get deeply ingrained, especially if you start doing them when you're 8, 9, 10 years old. But the other component is when your life doesn't feel, if you don't have that sense of fulfillment in your life, when your relationships aren't good, when you don't have a sense of purpose or meaning,
Mm.
you just feel like you're just trying to get by day after day, trying to pay the bills. You know, if there's this underlying sense of my life isn't how I want it to be, that's when we seek to escape it. And so a lot of the work of recovery is actually has nothing to do with the particular substance or behavior. It's about fixing the rest of your life.
Yeah. They used to say that the opposite to an addiction, I think you were talking primarily about alcoholism. The opposite to an addiction was sobriety. Whereas now they're looking more at, no, the sobriety is an outcome. The opposite is actually connection. It's feeling a sense of connectedness. And I think I might have just made up a word there, but feeling, feeling connected, feeling a part of something, having a purpose. I think that's
Hmm.
really interesting. And you talked about the rats. There's another paper that I read many years ago. I'm not sure who did it, but it was a similar thing. And it was about soldiers who'd been to Vietnam. While they were in Vietnam, a lot of them were using heroin. Now, who could blame them given what they were going through? But what they found is those that came home to things like protests, no job, no education, um, continued as addicts. Those who came home to families, to partners, to a job, to a place in college, to a place in the community, generally didn't use again.
Hmm.
I thought that was
I
really
believe
interesting.
that. Yeah, I believe that's what actually inspired the Rat Park experiment. Was that insight of these soldiers coming back from Vietnam, and they realized, hey, okay, there's something about the environment
Mm,
that someone is in that will dictate, how susceptible they are to addiction.
mm. I'm curious, when we talk about pornography addiction, primarily we're talking about men. It's men that become addicted to porn. But I've heard you speak before about how women become addicted as well. And I'm just wondering, would you notice a difference in what's going on, or is it pretty much the same thing? What would you see in the difference between men and women becoming addicted to pornography?
Yeah, women can definitely become addicted to pornography in the same way that men can. Visual pornography, online videos, these tube sites. Women tend to be slightly more. This is a broad generalization, but more aroused through the storyline and characters, the plot of what's going on. And so erotic literature tends to be much more common with women. This is where you get romance novels
Mm,
and erotic literature sites. Whereas men tend to be much more visually stimulated. There's a lot of overlap. Men can also be storyline driven and be interested in erotic literature as well. But we do tend to see that kind of difference. But more and more, we are seeing women getting addicted to porn in the same way that men are. And the underlying dynamics, I would say, are the same in the sense of understanding addiction as emotional regulation issues
mhm.
is the same for men and women. Looking for an escape, looking for a way to deal with emotions that you don't know how to deal with, and finding this escape, this refuge in something that gives you that temporary relief, even if it has downstream consequences.
And it's interesting you use the term of temporary relief because again, it's, would it be fair to say it's the temporary relief that people are constantly chasing, not
Mhm.
something long term?
Yeah.
Again, if you think of coming out of again any addiction, the short term pain is sometimes a deterrent to the longer term gain. So people keep chasing the short term hit. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the lie that addiction tells us, whispers into our ear. It says, if you just had this thing, then you'll feel okay. And what we're missing is, the full truth of the matter, which, yeah, you'll feel okay for a few seconds, but it doesn't tell you the full story, which is, hey, this might actually compound, as you mentioned earlier, compound the very thing that you're trying to run away from. If it's
Mm.
shame or a feeling of purposelessness, having no purpose, no meaning in life, it might actually compound these things and make it worse. But the saboteur that's inside of us just whispers that first part that says, hey, this will help you feel really good, for a little bit. And, we, that works for a while, particularly when we can handle the consequences for a while, or when the consequences are very subtle or long term. So this is one of the issues with porn addiction. A lot of times when we're struggling with substances or behaviors, that the consequences can be very immediate. With alcohol,
Yeah.
you wake up with a hangover, drunk driving can happen. With something like porn addiction, a lot of times you won't notice immediate consequences. The consequences might not come for a few years. It's the way they slowly leak into how you relate
The
to
other
your
areas.
partner, your expectations of intimacy, your dopamine signaling, all kinds of things that build up drop by drop slowly over years to the point where 10 years down the road, you've completely gone astray. It's like that analogy of a plane leaving from San Francisco flying to New York. If you're off by 1 degree,
Mm.
it doesn't seem like much in the beginning, but by the time you go 3,000 miles, you're
You're way
you're
off
in
track.
Florida. You're way off track. Yeah. And and that's how it is with porn. It's one of these things where you don't notice it on any given day, how you're veering off course. But when you look back 5 years ago and you say, wow, how have I gotten to this place in my life?
Yeah, it's that little piece at a time. What sort of things do you think? I know at some point everybody's gonna, if you will, they're gonna wake up and they're gonna realize, hold on, this is not the way I planned it. This is not the way it should be. What little things along the way do you think would be useful for people to keep an eye out for? Something to recognize, little things they might pick up on. You mentioned things like, the intimacy and even how we view our partners and so on. But what sort of things do you think people could keep an eye out for?
You mean in order to
Yeah,
determine whether or not it,
to recognize that they may have a problem.
yeah. A few things come to mind. First of all, is if you're hiding the behavior from your partner, that's a huge red flag. If this is something that you're keeping secret, you're hiding it, you're lying about it, keeping secrets of any kind, that's a huge signal to look into and say, okay, why am I hiding this? If it is okay, then I should be able to be open about this with my partner. So that's the first thing to look out for. Another thing could be, if you just notice the way that you are preferring to have your sexual needs met, and I use air quotes there, through porn and masturbation rather than with your partner,
Sure.
it might feel, oh, what's the big deal once in a while? But again, over time, there's
Mm.
this rift that gets built between you and your partner where more and more you start preferring how easy it is to just access porn to get exactly what you want when you want it
And it's
to
becoming
have.
it's becoming normalized for you as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Another thing is if you are starting to escalate in terms of the how extreme the things you're looking at is getting, if you're looking at things that are more and more nebulous in terms of, ethical,
Sure.
is this right? Is this in integrity? Is this how I want to treat my partner? Or is this,
Mm.
if I had a daughter, would I want her to be treated like this?
See.
It's a slow veering off course where you might not notice it any one session to the next. But if you look over the course of years, like, wow, how have I come so far where this is what is arousing me? This is the stuff that I'm getting into.
Yeah.
So that's also something to look at.
It's interesting, if you will. It's just as you're saying that, I'm thinking things become flipped on their head. What might start out as a novelty and something that is exciting, you're watching an image, which I don't know, maybe it's just I grew up in the wrong era, but I always thought of sex isn't what you would call a spectator sport, but maybe I'm just hardwired that way. But what starts out as exciting as a novelty later becomes the normal. Real interactions with human beings and with a partner who can, give you feedback, talk to you, interact with you, that becomes the strange, that becomes the weird. So you see a full flip of what intimacy looks like.
And it becomes, it's not just a flip where that becomes the novel and exciting thing. It flips where that becomes a burden or a hassle. Oh, I don't want to have to negotiate or
Mm.
to communicate about my desires or preferences or be given feedback that the way I did something wasn't right or,
Mm.
all the ways where it's not going to be perfect and it will be messy. And sometimes your partner's not in the mood and you have to be okay with that. So all of the ways it becomes less desirable, less, you're less able to use it as an escape. This is what really interesting, a lot of people who start to look at their behavior, they realize that they've been using their partner as a body to masturbate with,
Mm.
rather than actually to connect and be intimate with their partner. Especially guys who struggle with porn addiction, they end up closing their eyes, fantasizing about some porn that they recently saw while they're having sex with their partner. And it's a totally disconnected experience where they're just using their partner
Yeah.
and there's no real connection or intimacy there.
No, I think that's a very good point. I think of sex. Sex is something you do with someone. It's not something you do to someone. Whereas, when you look at pornography and so on, it's all about what the guy is doing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
What am I going to get? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The porn brain becomes very selfishly oriented, or it's my pleasure and my satisfaction.
there is also thing about pornography as well. Now, any kind of addiction. If you look at people go to things like AA meetings and Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, all those anonymous meetings. One of the things they often talk about is the shame that comes out with addiction. Sex and pornography, there is already a taboo around that, which makes it very, very difficult for anyone to talk about. So anybody that does ever reach out for support, regardless of the addiction, like, but anybody that does reach out for support, don't underestimate how much courage that has taken to in the first place. But another aspect to it as well, and this wouldn't be exclusive to pornography, is I'm always mindful of this mentor that I had once when I was a student therapist. He was an addictions counselor. And in his training sessions, he would talk about his own experiences as an alcoholic. And one of the things he said was he had tried to stop drinking many times. He'd be off it for a week, a month, 6 months, but he would always go back on. And eventually, he went to rehab, AA, went to therapy and all that sort of thing. And, he later went back to university, trained to become a therapist himself. But he would always tell this story that he had been sober for 2 years and his life was back on track. And he had his family back as well. And he was working, he was studying and all that. But his goddaughter was getting married. And she asked him, or she'd lost her dad. She asked him, would you walk me down the aisle? And he was thinking, this is a huge privilege. Of course I will. This is absolutely wonderful. But he came to this decision. He said, I'm going to go to the service. He said, I'm going to have the meal. He says, I'm going to give my speech. I'm going to toast the bride with a glass of orange juice, and then I'm going home. And he told me that, he told us and the group, even with the best will in the world, people are saying to him things like, you can't do that. It's her big day. You're standing in for her dad and they're going to play all that 70s music you love. And, this is, you can't do that. He says, no. He says, I'm going home because if I stay, I will drink. And I said, no, you won't. You're a completely different person. You haven't drank for 2 years. I said, if you think you're going to drink, don't worry about it. Sure, we'll keep an eye on you. We'll make sure you're okay. He was saying, really? How are you going to do that when you're drunk? But he said, with all the best will in the world, they were trying to convince him, it'll be fine. You will have a good time. And it's a big day. It's a wonderful day. And if you're worried you're going to drink, that's just your head talking nonsense to you. And what he said, I think, is one of the most insightful and honest things any addict will ever say. He says, that's where you're wrong. He says, my head is telling me I've got this. My head's telling me I can manage this. My head's telling me this won't be a problem. And he says, this is the thing about being an addict, coming to terms with the fact that I'm the biggest liar I know. I don't think that's exclusive to just things like alcoholism. I think that's anything. I don't think I think pornography is no different from that. Maybe the difference is there's a bigger taboo. So maybe someone might try to justify their behavior just that little bit more, even if, and I say that if they're trying to maybe quit, if they're trying to come off it themselves, they're not realizing some of the stories they're telling themselves. For instance, I haven't watched it for a week. That proves it's okay. Or I haven't watched it for, 3 weeks. That proves I can manage it. Or I've had a busy day. I deserve a treat. Or I'm having a hard time at the moment. I deserve whatever. Did you see what I'm getting at? The narratives that people tell themselves?
Hmm.
I don't think porn would be any different.
Yeah, I would agree. The thing I would add to that conversation, because I think it's absolutely beautiful what you're saying, to be mindful and aware of the stories that the saboteur can tell us, that part of us that wants to be complacent or say, I've got this now. I'm okay. I can get into some risky behavior. I can put myself in some danger zones and it'll be fine. So that complacency can, really sabotage
Mhm.
a lot of the hard work that you've done to get to the place that you are. At the same time, I think there's also the flip side of that is that sometimes the story that gets implanted in people's head, this is there's a thin line here, but the story sometimes is I'm powerless against this.
Mm.
And if somebody puts a glass of alcohol in front of me, then I don't have what it takes to resist. And that can also be a self-defeating prophecy. So that
Mm.
it's really tricky because they're both true. You can kind of say, hey, I don't have the willpower to resist this, and therefore I'm gonna use some forethought and be skillful here, and I'm gonna go home early because I know that if I stay late, it'll probably get the better of me. And that's a very skillful decision to make, to say it's not worth the risk. It's playing with fire. I know myself. At the same time, I've also seen that being a self-defeating, self-fulfilling prophecy where somebody says,
Yeah.
I'm powerless against porn. And then the moment it comes up into their life, a pop-up happens or
Mhm.
it gets presented to them.
Mhm.
They have this belief system that I was only good because I kept myself away from it. And I don't have the strength to resist it once it's here.
Mm.
And this is why I'm a strong proponent of also letting go of the story of powerlessness and to recognize that, yes, in certain situations, you might be powerless if you've gone too far already
Yeah.
and not let yourself, get triggered in that or not put yourself in a danger zone that you're going to relapse to. But also to recognize you are more powerful than you realize.
Mm.
And that a lot of the work of deep recovery is to build up that self mastery and
Mm.
cultivate an inner life that's so deep and so strong that even if the substance or behavior were right there, and even if all the conditions were pushing you in that direction, you had the presence of mind and the intentionality and the self restraint to be able to say, that's not who I am anymore. And I don't need to act out on this. So there's the thin line between those two.
Yeah. What you're saying sounds like it's the recognizing the power to make a choice.
Yeah.
I think it's a good.
Well, and also another kind of thing that illustrates this is, are you familiar with Kelly McGonigal?
No, no.
She's I forget where she was, but she gave this really famous TED talk. I think it was 10 years ago or so about about kind of stress and how we relate to stress. And it was a groundbreaking TED talk where she showed through her research that she was a professor at a laboratory that the story we have about stress dictates whether it's going to be healthy or unhealthy. In other words, that when you believe stress is bad for you, then when you
Yeah.
experience stress, it will be bad for you. But if your
Yeah.
belief about stress is that stress is good for you, that it makes you stronger, then experiencing stress actually makes you healthier and stronger and improves your life. And it's so groundbreaking because it just showed that what we believe to be true
Mm.
about an experience really dictates how we're going to
Yeah.
behave. And so I
Yeah.
think it's just so important to recognize the power of belief. And if you believe you're stronger than the substance or behavior,
Mm.
that can also be true. But
No,
to not get complacent.
no, that's a really good point. We human beings, as a rule, we tend to appraise everything through our belief system, and what we sometimes don't realize or don't recognize is your beliefs are either fact or feeling, and sometimes you need a little bit of reality testing. Yep.
Mhm.
But even you mentioned stress. You're absolutely right when it comes to something like stress, and we're going to be in stressful situations and so on. I believe stress is our way of telling ourselves this is important. I need to focus. That could be one way of looking at it. And if we didn't feel any kind of stress, we'd probably never do anything. So we need some a healthy level of stress. Anxiety is the same. Anxiety is our way of saying I need to be cautious here. I'm not sure how this is going to go. But the thing is, we feel them in short bursts and appropriate to the situation. So if we start to fear these feelings, then of course we're going to be thinking, what gets me out of this? What takes this away? I feel bad about it, therefore it must be bad. Rather than, I'm not sure about this. I need to be focused on this. What are my resources? What are my options? What are my choices? I always think it's the difference between what gets me out of this and what gets me through it. They're two completely
Mhm.
different questions. There's a question I did want to ask because I'm very curious about this. I've been looking more and more into this about how AI is pretty much everywhere nowadays. You don't even have to draft an email. You can ask a machine to do it for you. Um, my, wouldn't say a concern, still living in the analog age, I struggle, you know, the way the speed technology is going on. To some degree, I think AI, if people become dependent on it, even just for things like drafting their emails, even just something as simple as that, or asking it for advice, asking it for this, that, and the other, not necessarily a bad thing. My concern would be that AI might have the same impact on human interaction as porn has had for sex. Now, if you add the porn industry that might be using an AI where you're not even having to browse hours worth of videos, you get to create something. I'm just not seeing that ending well. I wonder what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's already here. I get asked this question a lot. What do you see in the future? And then what is it going to be like? And the truth is, y- it's already here. It's already happening. AI companions, AI generated porn,
Hmm.
stuff that is so, in the same way that social media companies develop these algorithms to just
Mhm.
really finely tune their algorithm to figure out exactly what video to show you that will, give you the most dopamine hit in the shortest amount of time. I mean, they can notice when you linger on a video for a split second longer than you normally do, and it will register that and say, oh, when we showed him the bikini model, he lingered on that video for zero point 0.2 milliseconds longer than he normally does. Let's try to show him another one. And through that repetition, that iteration, it goes deeper and deeper into understanding your profile and figuring out exactly what to send you to keep you hooked. That's already being done with AI porn and AI companions and AI girlfriends. And people are already using them and already losing their ability to have a real interaction with another human being,
Mm.
to communicate, to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to own up to things, to take risks. I mean, all these things that you kind of mentioned you're worried about are already happening. It's just that the question now is at what scale and how fast is it going to grow, and are there any barriers that are going to prevent it from taking over completely?
Yeah. As I say, growing up in the analog age, first we had to worry about were magazines and things like that, but it's a completely different world now. You do a lot of work with men in recovery and so on. I'm just wondering if you could talk me through the sort of work you do with guys that are struggling with porn.
Yeah, there's a lot of work we do. Some of the most important work we do is just being in community with other guys who are going through the same thing. I mean, that alone, if there's a guy out there who's struggling with addiction, particularly porn addiction or sex addiction, a lot of time they feel fundamentally broken. They feel like there's something inherently wrong with them and that everyone else is mostly fine, has got it figured out, but there's something wrong with them. They're uniquely broken. And that's where this toxic shame
Mm.
plays a key role. And so a big part of healing is just recognizing that you're not alone, recognizing that you're not broken in some unique way, that inherently flawed or unlovable, and that there are other people going through the same thing you're going through.
Mhm.
Just being in a community like that is incredibly healing. And you can
Yeah.
see the guys when they first come into a community like ours, there's this weight of shame that gets lifted. Oh, I'm finally in a place where I can talk about porn
Mhm.
and the way it's impacting me. and my feelings about how I feel stuck on it and how I don't want to do it, but I keep going back to it and I feel ashamed of that. And the ability to talk about and just be open about it is so healing for these guys.
Mm.
So that's part of the work we do. And then another huge component is the mindfulness practices, the inner work, meditation, self-compassion, self-awareness, impulse control, just learning how to work with what's going on in your mind at a very granular level, to notice when loneliness is coming up, to notice when insecurity is coming up. And then rather than immediately acting out on autopilot to escape that sensation, which is what most guys have done on autopilot since they were 10 years old,
Okay.
we give them the tools of, okay, I noticed I had a strong emotion and I was about to act out, but I was able to see it and choose a more
Yeah.
skillful path forward.
I think it's interesting. There is something about being more present. It's not that we don't think about something. It's not that we're not aware of something. It's not that we don't feel something. But I believe it's whenever we're a bit more present, that's when we can actually problem solve and navigate through or around something, as opposed to the default of what take this away.
Yeah. I would say it's more than just problem solve. It's everything. It
Hmm.
gives us back our whole life, because if we're not present for those moments, we are simply acting out our preconditioned habits and behaviors. We become like these robots, these slaves to lust and craving and fear and desire. And we become machines that are just reacting habitually. But being present, having that present moment awareness, it gives you access to that space where you get to choose how to live.
Hmm.
And that's where, there's that famous quote that's attributed to Viktor Frankl. It's actually Stephen Covey summarizing the work of Viktor Frankl, but it's this quote that says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. So it's between stimulus and response, between something happening and your response, there's actually space there. And in that space is where you get to choose how to respond. And that's where all of your growth and all of your freedom lie, is just in that space.
Yeah. If I paraphrase what you've just said, awareness is a powerful thing in the sense that it will give you the choice. You can go ahead and do what you're doing, do what you normally do, but you have a fair idea how it's going to end up, or choose something different. I would even say, and I say this to people I work with as well, give yourself permission to get it wrong, because you have to learn from what doesn't work as much as what does work. Also, you're not looking for something, again, when you're a bit more present and you're in that moment, you're not looking for what takes this away. What you might do, this is what the awareness and what the choice gives you. If I put it this way, put yourself on a scale. 0, you're absolutely grand, not a care in the world. You've just eaten a big bowl of lavender or whatever. 10, you're at your wit's end. So if you put yourself on that scale, and let's imagine it is really high, even if just for that moment, let's imagine it's an 8. You pay attention, how long does the 8 last? It might have lasted a moment. But also, let's imagine you are an 8. You're not thinking what takes it down to 0. You could be asking yourself, what would reduce it by just 1 point? Just 1 point. And it's little things like that help you to build resilience to uncomfortable feelings and so on. Just wonder what
Yeah.
your
And
thoughts on that are.
I love it. I would even take it further. That let's say, there's this beautiful scale you just painted for us, 0 to 10. 0 is you just, walking through meadows and it's beautiful. And 10 is, hellfire and brimstone and just the most pain. You as you pointed out, you can be at an 8 and say, okay, what would just take this down by 1 point? And then that already is a more skillful
Yeah.
relationship to that experience, rather than I need to get to 0 as quick as possible. Cause then it's, I need to take a hit of something. I need to inject something. I need to get stimulated to just immediately numb out. But even saying, how can I take this down 1 point to a 7? There's another option as well, which is to learn that you can be curious about the 8 and actually learn how to be at peace with the 8 and say, wow, this is really painful. And I don't actually need to bring it down to a 7. I'm actually strong enough to be here in this 8 and be at peace with this. It's unpleasant. It's painful. It's not what I want, but it's what's here. And that's what we call equanimity. That ability to be with what's unpleasant
Mm.
without running away from it and to just say, I'm feeling overwhelming sadness and that's okay. That's the quality of equanimity that they talk about in Buddhism so much is that inner peace, that groundedness in the state of whatever is going on. It could be utter chaos. It could be surrounded by pleasant, tempting things, but you're not chasing after the pleasant sensations. And you're also not pushing away the unpleasant. You're just there in the middle of it saying, wow, okay, this is how it is. I don't need to change things. I don't need to fix things. I can just be with this experience as it is. And that is true liberation. Real inner peace is when you don't have to
That's
fix anything.
that's
You can
very
just be
powerful.
with them as they are.
Mm. That's a very powerful way of putting it. Absolutely. Um, I'm gonna ask. I know we're pushing out our time here, but I'm just going to ask one more question.
I can take a little bit more time because this is
Oh,
a fun
great. Okay.
conversation. So I'm enjoying it. Yeah.
Okay.
Eh,
I think that when people do become hooked to something like pornography, I think something that often gets missed is how fake it is. I'm just imagining, right? If you're watching a movie and it doesn't matter how excited you might be, it doesn't matter what they're doing, it doesn't matter what they look like. I think sometimes what we don't realize is maybe there's a guy standing over here with a camera. There's a guy standing over here with a light, and there's a guy standing over there with a mic. And they're being told what to do, how to do it, it's to stop, to change position, to do it differently. It has got to be the most fake, made up thing ever. But we don't see that when we're on the wrong end of it. What are your thoughts?
I think you didn't go far enough
Okay.
with your analogy because sometimes it says, kind of mundane as that you're not seeing the cameraman, but there's also a really dark underbelly of exploitation, of
Mm,
sex trafficking. A lot of times what you're seeing, you think, wow, what a pleasant fantasy this is. This
mm.
girl looks like she's enjoying it. The guy looks like he's enjoying it. And you don't see that it's not just how kind of superficial it is and not real it is, but actually almost how opposite it can be to what you're witnessing in terms of the degradation, the exploitation,
That's a
the
really good way of
humiliation.
putting it. Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
yeah, very
And we
exploited.
become blind to that. Because of these multi-billion dollar industries and these companies that have a lot of money,
Mm,
they are able to whitewash their image and make it seem like this is all kosher. And they sell these stories that, oh, the performers are benefiting and everyone's just happy. And this is the sexual liberation. I mean, that's the story that gets told a lot. And you don't see a lot of the really sad stories behind a lot of these things.
No, I think that's a very fair point. It's again, it's another aspect to how fake it is.
Yeah, it's my own personal viewpoint on this. It's a very messy situation because I do know some people who are, they have an OnlyFans and they enjoy it and they benefit on it and it's a small scale thing. And so similarly, I'm not going to judge and say, wow, that can't be healthy. To each their own. But I do think on the whole, so much more harm is caused by that industry that even if 1% of the performers are benefiting from it, we
Mm.
have 99% or even a fraction of that are whose lives are getting destroyed or, who are becoming exploited. It just doesn't make sense to support it as an industry.
And the other aspect to that would be if you were to look at something like OnlyFans. Now, if I was to play it, because I'm on YouTube, you're on YouTube with podcasts and things like when you put something out there, we do feel good that people watch it and people comment and people maybe like our information or whatever. We do get something like that. But you would also get that someone who's maybe putting out content like that, the more comments they're getting, again, there's that sense of that rush, that feeling good and so on. And just like anything else, you see a lot of even YouTube channels where things become very sensationalized.
Yeah.
Something I said when I first started out. I wanted to talk about things, but I'll try to talk about it factually. I'll try to talk about it in a balanced way. I don't want to talk about things with the drama, the intrigue, the sensationalism, because there's just so many people doing that. But
Right.
if someone is performing in such a way on, something like OnlyFans, my concern would be the rush they get encourages them to do more and more, to become more and more outrageous, to do more. And there's, I can't remember the lady's name. I think she's an English girl, but there was something like 100 guys in a day or something.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the rush, the dopamine that she might be getting from being more and more outrageous.
Yeah.
Now,
I think I
I've
think I
never
know what you're
met the
talking about.
lady, so I don't
Yeah.
know, but that's just my assumption.
Yeah. I think it was even something like 1,000 guys in one day. It, it was, yeah. I think you're right to point out these things could be an addiction on their own, and it's an escalation thing where it's never enough, and leads to wanting to do more and more extreme. In the same way that social media, chasing the algorithm, chasing likes, all these things can be addictions, and some have more serious consequences and risks
Mhm.
than others. I mean, we can also point out, yeah, a lot of things can be addictive. I'm addicted to coffee and I'm addicted to exercise. And there are certain ways in which my use of those substances and behaviors has some negative consequences. But on the whole, it brings more benefits. And that's a calculation I make. And that's, you know, when it comes down to addiction and recovery, I really just want people to make that calculation and to have the clarity and the awareness to actually look at it honestly and to say, what are the ways that this substance or behavior is adding benefit to my life? And what are the ways it's causing harm?
Mm.
And if you start to notice that the harms are outweighing the benefits, you're better served letting go of it.
Yeah.
And that's important because a lot of guys will recognize, oh, porn brings me some benefit. It helps me, reduce stress in the moment, gives me some stimulation and some distraction. I feel a sense of power and control. But when you start to line that up to all the consequences it's bringing, the harms it's causing in your relationship, your motivation, mental clarity, time wasted, you realize it's not a wise trade off.
Yeah. Like I said, it costs you more than you ever thought you'd have to pay,
Mhm.
and doesn't give you a fraction back that you thought it would.
Yeah.
Jeremy, where can people find you, particularly the work you do with recovery? Where could people find you?
Yeah. If people want to learn more about the work that I do, the program that I run, or the coaching work I do, they can go to unhookedacademy.com.
Hmm.
And if they just want to learn more about this work in general, more about the topic, I have a podcast called Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, where we dive deep into all the world of addiction and mindfulness and relationships and all those good things.
It's good to know. I will put links to your channel, your podcast, and your website. I'll put them in the description of the video. Everybody watching or listening, I would encourage you to check out Jeremy's work. I've been watching quite a few of your videos over the past week or so. There's some really good information there. So keep up the good work. And maybe this is something you might like to pick up and we could continue another time. Talk about this.
I'd love to. Yeah, fascinating conversation. There's barely scratched the surface on a lot of these topics.
Absolutely.
So,
You're right. We
yeah,
barely scratched the surface, but I feel I've learned a lot from you this morning.
appreciate it. Hey, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, please go back and look at the prior episodes. They're loaded with valuable insights and information on this journey of recovery. I really appreciate your attention and thanks for being a part of this journey. See you later.